Dr. Laurence Cook is a nationally recognized presidential historian specializing in the personal side of the presidency. He's a lifelong collector of presidential memorabilia and has a museum quality collection which exceeds 8,000 pieces. Yes, I said 8,000 pieces. He is the author of several books, including his most recent one, which is this. I hope I can get it on there. Yeah. Symbols of Patriotism, First Ladies and Daughters of the American Revolution. And that was just released last year. He does programs and events at historic places, including several programs for the National Park Service. He has worked on projects with President Jimmy Carter, and he knows presidents and presidential descendants and many famous people like that personally. So let's stop hearing about him and get right to introducing him and hearing from him. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Oh, thank you, Sally and Rob, for having me on. I really appreciate it. This is a great group, and I love your title, Choose Happy. I just love that. That's been my mantra, to be positive, and that's what I try to do with history and with the collecting and the sharing of my collection and my historic knowledge to make people feel good and to show them the personal side of the presidency.
Well, I am so happy that you said yes when we asked you when you got backed into this, but I really appreciate you being here. First of all, before you get started, could you just tell us a little bit like how you got started? If you remember the first thing you collected, and just maybe give us just a real quick tour of it would take us a long time, I know, but we're excited to see what's behind you.
Absolutely. You mentioned the first thing that I collected. I actually have the first piece of memorabilia. This is my first piece of memorabilia, and probably many of you recognize this. It's just a little thing that could be picked up in the 70s in a store, comparing Lincoln and Kennedy and all the coincidences in their lives. Like Lincoln was elected in 1860, Kennedy in 1960, et cetera. Both presidents were concerned with civil rights. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, et cetera. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of those things. And actually, my grandmother gave me that when I was like 12 years old. And my interest in the presidency probably began when I was 3 years old, actually, because in November 22nd, 1963 is my first memory of life. I couldn't tell you what happened the day before or the day after that, because I was 3 years old. But of course, that was the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. And I remember that day. I remember my parents' reaction to it. And that's the only thing I can really attribute to my interest in the presidency. My mother always had some interest in history and the presidents, but never to the extent that I do. And then, as I mentioned, when I got to be 12, my grandmother gave me that. She actually gave me one and my cousin one. And when I got that, I was just so intrigued with it. I went to the library at the school that I attended, the elementary school, and looked up all these facts to see if they were all true. And my parents were and still are. I'm very fortunate to still have my parents, and were always supportive of everything that I did, as was my grandmother. And so, knowing that I had an interest in the presidency, they would pick up other things for me, campaign buttons, that type of thing. We didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, so it was nothing expensive, but they would get me little things during campaigns and things like that. And I would do the same thing. If I got a Nixon button, I would look up everything about Nixon. And then it's very ironic. I always say I had kind of and still do, kind of a Forrest Gump type of life, because the things that have happened to me throughout my life, it's just ironic because, and one of those things is when I was 15 years old, Jimmy Carter decided to run for president. And I remember watching him on TV, watching his mother, his brother. His mother reminded me of my grandmother, who I was just talking about. His brother reminded me of my favorite uncle, who was a pickup truck driving guy who would throw his beer can in the back, that type of thing. So I felt a real connection to them. And little did I know that, you know, years and years later, you know, President and Mrs. Carter would be amongst my best friends. It's just really ironic. And I never knew Billy Carter, his brother, but I do know his wife and all their kids. And President Carter made Diane and I honorary citizens of Plains. So you know, and I remember seeing the depot and the Billy Carter service station on TV when I was a kid, and you know, little did I know I would be so ingrained into that. But so my grandmother started me on this collecting. Little did I know at 12 years old that was going to someday change my life. I continued to collect up through as much as I could into young adulthood. Even when I was in college, I couldn't afford anything, but I would pick up things and here and there. And then as things progressed and as you get more established and have a little more money, you can get a few more things and grew the collection. And then actually, it would take up the whole time to explain my story with the Carters and how we really got to be friends with them. But long story short, with being friends with the Carters over the last, we've been friends for about 16, 17 years now. I got asked by the National Park Service to start coming there and speak and show some of my collection. That led into the Carters attending my presentations, and the Carters are actually the ones responsible for me becoming a full-time historian. So about 4 or 5 years ago, they were telling me that I should do more and more of it. So about 3 years ago, my wife and I owned a business. We decided to sell the business, and I decided to do the history work full-time. So the collecting really just led into you know, a life-changing thing when my grandmother gave me that first item. And I still do the same thing today that I did when I was 12 years old. When I get a new piece in my collection, I'll look at it, I'll study it, I'll learn more about that president or that first lady than I knew before, just by getting the piece and by, you know, looking into that particular piece and the history behind it.
So I was talking to Larry when we first got started, and I asked him if you could pan the camera around your room so we could just sort of get a vision of this. I asked him who did this, because when you see this room, you're going to think it's museum. It looks like a museum. And he actually said he did all of it, hung it up, framed everything, because he has these valuable things he doesn't want to leave at the frame shop. So look at that.
This is just one room. I actually have 2 rooms that are, the other room is just as full as this one. You'll see a couple spots on the wall that are empty, and that's because I have the things on the table behind me so I can show you for this presentation. But
hey, Larry, Lynn Jackson just joined us. Hi, Lynn.
Hello there, Sally. How are you?
Good. Now talking to us about showing us his room, his collection room.
Oh my goodness. Oh dear. Well, I just saw your email 2 seconds ago. I was about to go fix my husband dinner. He has a bad tooth and I don't know what to fix. But I said, oh, well, I must sign on for Sally.
Well, you sign on and you just listen. And if you have to walk into the other room or whatever, that's okay.
Yeah, I'll take
All
the
right,
laptop
Larry.
with me. Thank you. Hi, Larry.
hi, Lynn, how are you?
I'm good. I'm making it.
Good. Well, I hope your husband's tooth feels better.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to listen to this while I cook. So thank you for letting me know about it. Okay.
All right. Now, Larry, tell us all about the first ladies.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about 6 or 7 of the first ladies that I've highlighted in my book. If you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about how the book came about. I spoke to I do a lot of speaking engagements, and about 2 years ago, I spoke to the local DAR group here in Pennsylvania. I'm in northeastern Pennsylvania, for those of you who didn't know that. And so they had asked me to be their keynote speaker for their annual dinner. And I just wondered at that time if there were any first ladies that were in the Daughters of the American Revolution. I didn't know, because I'd done mainly presidential history and the personal side of the presidents, and had done some first lady stuff, but not a lot. So when I did a quick search, I found that there were 5 that I found really quickly that were associated with the Daughters of the American Revolution. And so I presented on those 5 and brought memorabilia related to them. and it was a big hit. And so my wife and daughter happened to be at the event. My wife said, "You got to do more on First Ladies. People really liked it." And so I was talking to Nicholas Inman, who Rob and Sally are friends with, and Nicholas loves First Lady history. And he said to me, "You know, you ought to write a book on that." And so I took his advice and I did some more research, and I ended up finding that there were 12 First Ladies that were involved with the Daughters of the American Revolution. And no one else had done a book on it, which surprised me. So continued to do deep research, and then got a publishing deal. And about a month after I got the publishing deal, COVID hit. And so that kind of hurt my research capability, because all of the historic sites and libraries and all that were closed. Fortunately, as Sally mentioned, I know a lot of presidential descendants. And so fortunately that helped. And then this collection that I've amassed since I was 12 years old also helped. And I also have a very large library of my own with over 1,000 books, even some of them from the time periods of the presidents, even some of the early presidents. For example, I have a book on James Buchanan that was written about him even before he was president. So I have books from that, the time period. So that helped me a great deal with doing the research for the book. So so far the book has been a really big hit. Sales have been great. DAR members love it. And now this coming Saturday, I will be the keynote speaker once again for that first DAR group that I did. So they're having their annual meeting this Saturday. And so I'll be back there, and they're very excited about that they were the cause of me doing the book. So we'll talk a little bit about the role of the First Lady, and then we'll talk about, like I said, 6 or 7 of the 12 First Ladies that I have in the book. But when you think about the role of the First Lady, it's very interesting, because there's probably no other person in the United States other than the president that's more looked at by the public, more scrutinized. Probably the First Lady is even more scrutinized on a personal level than the president is, because the First Lady gets judged on her hairstyle, the type of clothes she wears, what purse she's carrying, what shoes she has on, you name it. And there is no salary for that position. There is no job description for that position, other than traditionally it's been a hostess of the White House. And I learned a lot by writing this book, because getting just not only the First Ladies individually, but the office in general. And what I realized that the office makes the First Lady, and the First Lady makes the office. And what I mean by that is, like I said, there is no job description. The First Lady can take on agendas that she chooses, but also there are things that are outside of her control that varies what she does in the office based on what's happening in the United States, what's happening with her husband. For example, natural disasters, wars, that type of thing. And we think of it, and we'll talk on a couple of these First Ladies with things that have happened when they were First Ladies that kind of changed their job. But even up to, recent First Ladies like Laura Bush during 9/11, that altered her duties as First Lady. So, it's a very intriguing office. And the other thing with the office of the First Lady is it is totally a 24/7 job. And so is the president. But, the First Lady is also, she's also a mother. She's responsible for, like any wife or mother, for the household, for the children. And I just can't imagine carrying on all your daily duties, and then, also being First Lady of the United States. And one of the First Ladies that we're not going to talk about, but while I'm on the subject, I will mention her, Frances Cleveland. She was the youngest First Lady in history, and she became First Lady at 21 years of age. I mean, that just is incredible to think that a 21-year-old was First Lady. And, what I like to bring out in my talks and in my writings that for presidents and First Ladies, that these people are just that. They're people like you and me. And they're just people that were thrown into extraordinary circumstances and had to handle the job. And, you know, a lot of these people didn't think they were going to be president any more than you or I think we're going to be president or first lady. But they were thrown into the job and they stepped up. But Frances Cleveland really amazes me at 21 years old to be first lady. So we'll start talking about some of these first ladies. The first one that I wanted to mention is Sarah Polk. And Sarah Polk really intrigued me because her husband, James K. Polk, the 11th president, he was elected or inaugurated in 1845. And I don't know about you, but I think most people think this way. I think most people felt like back then, first ladies probably were pretty much seen and not heard from. And that was just the opposite of what we would think there. Sarah was in kind of a unique position to help her husband because they never had any children. They were the only presidential couple to never have any children, either by adoption or by one of them having children before marriage. So the Polks never did, and that really freed Sarah up to help her husband as a congressman, and then to help him even more when he became Speaker of the House. And she would be in Tennessee and do newspaper clippings for him as congressman and Speaker of the House. And really, she had her thumb on the pulse of things that were going on in his district and things that he needed to know about. And she really helped him with that. She was really intrigued with the Washington lifestyle, wanted to go to Washington, and was able to, again, because she wasn't, wasn't tied down at home in Tennessee with a family. And so she came to Washington a lot and also helped the then Congressman Polk and Speaker of the House Polk quite a bit. So she was thrilled when he became president. His health was never really that great, even when he ran for president, but he did, and he won, and Sarah was very happy about that. And to get back to my point about, we think of first ladies probably in the 1840s, we would all think of them as not being very active in the public eye, and she was just the opposite. She took on the job there at the White House with what jobs, plural, with what we would think of now as the press secretary, chief advisor, and chief of staff. She did it all. And she really acted as a gatekeeper for the president. And she ruffled a lot of feathers, even those of James Buchanan, who was Secretary of State at the time, George Dallas, who was vice president. She didn't always allow them just to walk in and see the president when they wanted to. And she would also, which I think will surprise some of you, would hold press conferences, more or less. They weren't really termed press conferences then, but she would go out and talk to the press. And she was very clever because she would interject her own ideas and thoughts into the comments to the press, but she would make them sound like they were coming from her husband. And so that was very, very clever. She was able to get her views out there. And her husband was good with that. And he was good with her gatekeeping thing because James Polk was not a real people person. It was fine with him to limit the number of people that came into his office that tried to get his attention. And you got to remember, in the White House in those days, a lot of people could just come in, and it really distracted the president. Not only just people from his cabinet and such, but the general public could walk into the White House at that time. Sarah was also known as Sahara Sarah because she would not allow any alcoholic beverages in the White House. So she was nicknamed that by the public. As I mentioned, James Polk was not ever really in great health, and he only wanted one term as president. And when that term was up, he was very happy to leave the White House and go back to Tennessee. They did a tour of the southern United States first, and then went to go back to Tennessee to retire. And unfortunately, he died 3 months after retirement. So Sarah took all of his letters, and at that time, the letters and documents and all that belonged to the president. She took all that stuff back to Polk Place and set it up in her house, in their very large house there, as a memorial to her husband. And so she's never credited really with the first presidential library, because it really wasn't that. But I give her credit for doing that and kind of being the forerunner probably of presidential libraries, or at least the display of the presidential documents and artifacts, because she would entertain a lot of people at Polk Place. So a lot of people got to see those things that she had out on display. And for the rest of her life, she dressed in black, and she signed her name as Mrs. James K. Polk and not Sarah Polk. So in honor of her husband.
Mary, I want
Go
to ask,
ahead.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned when you were talking about
No.
Sarah Polk about that that people could just go to the White House. I'm not sure everybody realized this. I didn't really know this. Now, you know, we call it the People's House or whatever, but years ago, anybody could just go up and knock on the door and go in, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not even sure they had to knock on the door. You know, they would go in. I talk about that a little bit with Caroline Harrison, as we're going to talk about next. But yeah, and it was very distressing and distracting to the president. A lot of the people that would come into the White House back in those years, and that even happened even up beyond Abraham Lincoln, because we're talking what 15 years earlier with Polk, but it was even the same way up through the 19th century, most of it. And you know, a lot of the people that came into the White House at that time, they weren't just coming in to meet the president. They were coming in to ask for a favor. That's, you know, usually somebody had something they were pulling on the president's coattails about, whether they wanted a job, whether they wanted somebody in their family pardoned, you know, etc. So, you know, it was very distracting. And so Sarah acting as a gatekeeper there was very helpful, you know, to her husband in that respect.
How long did that go? Up to what president could you just go? You know, I just.
I think it changed gradually. I mean, it's still changing. I mean, as you know, they've closed, you know, the road in front of the White House there several years ago, and et cetera. And it just gets more and more difficult, which I kind of think is sad. I mean, you can't have it the other way either, where people can just walk in, but also it's getting very, very difficult with recent events and that to you know, get a tour ticket to the White House or to the Capitol. But I would say, I don't know the exact date because it was like gradual change, but I would say up into the early 20th century, it was still going on to some extent, where it wasn't quite so difficult to get in, you know, to get into the White House. You know, I would say it probably started to get more and more difficult, you know, sometime, you know, into the 1920s and you know, up from there. And like I said, it's just changed, and it still changes even today.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Caroline Harrison, another first lady that I really like talking about. She was very important in the book because she was the first president general of the DAR, of the Daughters of the American Revolution. The president general is the national leader of the DAR. She really helped the DAR to get national recognition, because as first lady, when she supported it, of course, it really helped the organization when they were getting on their feet in 1891, 1892. And when Carolyn and her husband Benjamin came into the White House in between the terms of Grover Cleveland. I mentioned Frances Cleveland, the first lady, Grover's wife, and I'll just go off on a little side note there that Grover Cleveland was forever responsible for messing up the presidential numbering system, because Grover was the only president to have two non-consecutive terms. So Grover was the 22nd and 24th president. He served won the election, served his 4 years, and then Benjamin Harrison came along and won the election when Grover was trying to go for his second term. He came in, and at the time when they were leaving, Frances told the White House staff, don't change too many things. And the White House staff said, why is that? And she said, because we're going to be back in 4 years. And she was absolutely correct on that. And came back in 4 years, and the Grover did, and won the election against Benjamin Harrison. and came back in the White House. So Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd president, right in there between the two Cleveland terms. And when Caroline came in as First Lady, one of the first things she recognized was the bad state of the White House. It was in need of a lot of repair. And I mentioned we were going to mention her in that. And that's one of the reasons why the White House back then would need a lot of updating and a lot of repairs, is because just think about that. Think about the foot traffic that they had through that White House when pretty much anybody could just walk in. And also, unfortunately, people are people, and people would take souvenirs and chip pieces of wood off and steal things and that type of things, take rip pieces of rug or carpet up and that type of thing. So it was hard to keep the White House up. So when Benjamin Harrison and Caroline came in, Caroline immediately started lobbying for money to fix up the White House. And she didn't get all the money she wanted, but she did get a significant amount. She wanted to put a wing on the White House. She wanted to go all out. She didn't get approval for all of that, but she did get a fair amount of money to do renovations. And one of the things that she did was she put electricity had electricity installed in the White House for the very first time. And that was great, except for one thing, that once they had it in there, she and the president were scared to death to touch the light switches. And I love that, because that was the technology of the time. We're all scared of our iPhones and our computers, and are we going to hit the right button, and are we going to be able to get on Zoom, and am I on there? And they were kind of the same way with electricity at that time, but they refused to touch the light switches. And they would leave the lights on all night long and wait for an employee to come in the morning to turn the lights off. It's because they just wouldn't touch those switches. Caroline was also not in good health, throughout her time as First Lady. And I have a piece here that, excuse me, I have to move around to get some of these things, but I have a piece here that I really like. And as you can see, it's an executive mansion, dated June 13th, 1892. And this is a letter from President Benjamin Harrison. And you can see his signature there. And I'm just going to read part of it to you. It says, Mrs. Harrison continues to suffer from nervous prostration and makes a very tedious recovery. I don't know when I will be able to get her away or to get away myself for a little rest, which I very much need. And I love this letter because it's so personal, where he's talking about not that he's the president of the United States there, but he's talking about his concern for his wife and concern for himself in needing rest. And Caroline died about 3 months after that letter was written. And she died in the White House as First Lady. Oh, thank you. You're showing the book there. And that's another thing that, I get so personally involved with these presidents and first ladies when I study them. And I just think about how traumatic that had to be for Benjamin Harrison. He's president of the United States. He's trying to get reelected. And 2 weeks before Election Day, his wife passes away in the White House. So it's just the awesomeness of the responsibilities there, and then handling your own personal life along with that is just incredible. The other things, though, about Caroline is that you'll find interesting is she was responsible for starting the White House Christmas tree tradition. And the other thing that she did was started the White House China display. In Victorian times, China painting was the equivalent of what we think of now, like scrapbooking, that type of thing. It was the craft thing to do at the time. And she was a very talented artist and painted very, very nice White House China. And when we get to, Sally, if I forget, and if you remind me when we get to talk about Florence Harding, just tell me to mention something about White House China there that correlates with Caroline, and I have a little story there to tell about that. But she actually started the White House China display, And so, and that still goes on today. If you've been to the White House, that's one of the attractions, to see the White House display from all the different administrations. Now, when she, as I mentioned, she was never in good health, Caroline. So when she became First Lady and had to take on all the responsibility, she brought in her niece, Mary Lord Dimmock, to help her with her First Lady duties in the White House. At that time, there was no paid staff for the First Lady, so it was all her. Or, you know, if she brought in a friend or a relative for free, that was fine. So she brought in her niece, and her niece worked there alongside her, helping her with the First Lady duties. After she passed away and Benjamin Harrison lost the presidency, about 3 years later, Benjamin Harrison ended up getting remarried, and he married Mary Lord Dimmock, Caroline's niece. And that caused a big scandal in the family, and Harrison's kids were not happy about it. But I do have an envelope here that's all in Mary Lord, now her name Harrison, Benjamin Harrison's second wife. That's all in her handwriting. And then if you turn around, if you're able to see it, on the back of the envelope, it says Mrs. Benjamin Harrison on the back of the envelope. Now, another First Lady that's in my book and I really enjoy talking about is Julia Grant. And I'm really intrigued with Julia because Julia, right out of the gate, was probably the most, or one of the most unlikely First Ladies or women to become First Lady. And the reason for that is because she came from a Southern plantation family, and she ended up marrying Ulysses Grant, who came from a Northern abolitionist family. So it was pretty unlikely that those two would get together in the first place, even to get married, long before the presidency was even on the radar for them. But how they met was that Ulysses was in West Point, and one of his best friends in West Point was Frederick Dent, who was Julia's brother. And he really was fond of Ulysses. They were best friends, and he said, "You have to meet my sister." So that's how Julia and Ulysses met. And I love talking about this, and Sally's helping me out here with showing a picture of Ulysses that fits right into my next statement, because you look at Ulysses there, and I also have a cabinet card of Ulysses. And you just think of him as a, kind of a rough and tough, gruff Civil War general. And he really wasn't. He was really quite a romantic. Julia was born with strabismus. And if you don't know what strabismus is, that's the medical term for the slang crossed eyes. And so her eyes were, had strabismus and were crossed, and it never really bothered her too much until Ulysses became, a famous general, and she was out in the public a lot. And so then she became more conscious of her appearance and wanted to get them corrected surgically, or at least attempt to correct it surgically. And I see somebody grimacing there, Deborah, maybe grimacing there, because you're right. If she would have gotten that operation, it would have probably been disastrous, because it was pretty experimental at that time. But anyway, when she went to Ulysses and asked or told him that she was thinking of doing that, he begged her not to do it. And he said that he didn't want her to do it because those were the eyes that he fell in love with. And, so that shows you that tough Civil War general, he was a real romantic. The other story I really like about those two that show what a romantic he was is how he proposed to her. He was, as I mentioned, in West Point in the military. And so they actually only saw each other after they were engaged. I think they saw each other only 2 or 3 times over the next 3 years before they were married. And but how he proposed to her was they were out on a carriage ride, and it had rained earlier that day or the day before, and they were about to go over a bridge and the creek was really swollen with fast running water. And Julia was frightened to go over the bridge in the buggy. And he assured her that it would be okay. And so she clung to his arm, and they went over the bridge and got to the other side safely. And when they got there, he stopped the carriage and said, you clung to me when we came across the bridge. I'd like you to cling to me for the rest of your life.
Oh.
And again, you know, a real romantic, and I love that. I love that story. The thing that I like about Julia, or am intrigued by, was she was the biggest cheerleader for her husband. Her husband, Ulysses, was not really successful in too many things other than being a soldier and a general. He was not successful in business before the presidency or after. And she always believed in him. And she would have premonitions that were almost on a psychic type premonition. And she would tell people, you just wait until he becomes president. And she always had premonitions of greatness for him, despite the fact that they had very little money and that things just really didn't work out well for him, you know, in business. And the other thing that I'm very happy to show you, that I just got this a week ago, but this is a handwritten letter from Julia Grant. I'm trying to get it where there's no glare on it, if you can see her signature. This would have been well after Ulysses had passed away, but she's inquiring about a pension here. And I believe it's probably inquiring about a pension check from Ulysses' military pension. But I was very happy to have that. You may or may not realize this, but in the collecting field of collecting presidential memorabilia, it's a whole lot easier to find signed things from presidents than first ladies, because presidents sign a heck of a lot more things than first ladies do, especially back earlier, you know, 19th century first ladies. So I was very happy to have that.
Larry,
Yeah.
many of the people watching from St. Louis get excited when we hear about Grant and
Yes.
Julia Dent, because, for instance, my sister Barb, who's on there, we grew up, you know, literally a couple blocks away from Julia Dent's Whitehaven. And so everybody in St. Louis kind of has a pride and we know that at Grant's farm, they have the little hard scrabble, the little log cabin that General Grant made. So I also wanted to point out that I am going to post up how people can get this book. I don't want to show all the pictures. I shouldn't be showing all the pictures, but it's a really great book with lots of pictures and lots of stuff in. So back to you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and you can just email me at lcookhistorian@gmail.com. And when we get the email, my manager, Renee, will direct you to the Google form to fill out to order the book, and we can send you a signed copy. Thank you, Sally, for that. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. I said they're going to love it there when I talk about Julia Grant because of her St. Louis connection. And I could go on and on and on, but we would run out of time. So I want to touch on a few other first ladies, but Edith Roosevelt is one that I like to talk a little bit about. This is a cabinet card from 1902. That's actually a souvenir from an event that the president and first lady were at. So you can see what Edith looked like as first lady there. Now, Edith got to meet her husband, Teddy Roosevelt, because they were each other's first playmates when they were toddlers. They lived next door to each other in New York City. Their families lived next door. And the one thing that I really think is very cool is at 4 years old, they stood together and watched Lincoln's funeral pass by their house in New York City. And, you know, that's just awesome to think about that. They, as I mentioned, they were first playmates. They grew up together. It's a little vague in history whether they were actually, when they got a little older into their teens, whether they're actually boyfriend, girlfriend. They were, you know, just good friends. But then they kind of split off on their own ways with school and that type of thing. And Teddy ended up getting married to a lady named Alice. And unfortunately, Alice died from result of childbirth from their daughter, Alice, who was also named Alice. And Teddy's mother died on the exact same day in the same house as his wife. So that put Teddy into the tailspin, which really changed history because that's what caused him to go out west on his famous west escapades out in the Dakotas. And when he returned from that, he went over to visit his sister, and Edith and Teddy's sister had remained friends. And Edith happened to be over there when Teddy came back from the Dakotas. And so they struck up a relationship there. And they actually kept it a secret out of respect for Teddy's first wife, Alice. So they kept it a secret for about a year and a half before they announced that their relationship. When Edith married Teddy, she really got a lot, probably more than she bargained for, because she had Teddy, who we all know was just full of energy and doing a million different things. And she also became the stepmother of Alice. And I don't know if any of you have read any books on Alice Roosevelt, but she was quite a character in her time. As a matter of fact, she had a pillow, an embroidered pillow in her adult years that said, "If you don't have anything good to say about somebody, come over here and sit next to me." And so that kind of tells you. But she was pretty wild for the day. She smoked. She would, say things that a lady back then shouldn't say. And, Teddy would say, "I can either be president of the United States or I can control Alice, but I can't do both." So Edith really took on quite a job when she married Teddy. And when she got into the White House, she also was very protective of her husband. She moved her office to in the White House right next, or she started an office, didn't move her office there. She put an office in right next to Teddy in the White House so she could keep an eye on him. She could make sure that he ate his lunch, that type of thing. She called him her fifth boy. So that's how she took care of him and worried about him. She was worried about him working too hard. And she ended up buying a cabin out in rural Virginia called Pine Knot for him to go and get away from the pressures of Washington. And Teddy thought he was out there all alone when he would go out to relax. But little did he know, Edith had hired a Secret Service agent to go out and stay in the woods anytime the president was out in Pine Knot. And Teddy never knew that, but he was under Secret Service protection without knowing it. I mentioned before about the White House China that Caroline Harrison had started. And Edith was also very much into the White House China and expanding the display and the collection. And she even completed a set of Caroline Harrison's White House China in respect to Caroline Harrison and what she had done for the China display. And I think that's just really a nice thing. I love telling that story because you could see an incoming first lady or a sitting first lady that's just really thinking about history and thinking about her predecessors there and doing something to carry on the tradition. So I just think that's a really nice thing. Florence Harding, we're going to talk a little bit about, and I'm very happy because this is the first event that I'm showing this particular piece to, so I haven't even had a chance to frame it yet. But this is a check signed by Warren Harding. You can see his signature right below where it says not over $10 there. That's a check from the Marion Star newspaper, and you can see under the Marion Star it says by W.G. Harding. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Marion Star. I kind of jumped ahead with that, but I was excited to show it because I just got it today, actually. So you're the first group to see that piece of memorabilia. I ordered it from a person that sells historic documents, and I was hoping it would be in by today. So it was. So Florence Harding, she was another quite a character. We were talking about Alice Roosevelt, and she was a character kind of along those lines. First of all, Florence when she met Warren, she was divorced and a single mother, which back then would kind of cause people to talk about you. Bordered on scandalous. She chased Warren until she caught him. Warren was an eligible bachelor in Marion. She was 5 years older than Warren, and she kind of, like I said, chased him till she got him. Florence was a very, I want to say energetic, but focused person, but very strong-willed. And she made no, what I want to say, secret of it, I guess, before being first lady and while being first lady. What she did, as you saw from this check, it said the Marion Star on it. Warren owned the Marion Star newspaper in Marion, Ohio. And when they got married, she became the circulation manager for the newspaper and really took over the day-to-day running of the newspaper and did a fantastic job. Increased circulation, increased subscriptions, increased revenue for the paper, but she ruled it with an iron fist. She was known to reward the newsboys when they did a good job, and she was known to go out on the street and spank them if they didn't. And that's pretty. I see Deborah's eyes light up, and I said that. But she, that is surprising. But she would, if they didn't do a good job, she was known to publicly go out there and spank them. These were young boys that were, 10, 12 years old that were or maybe even younger, that were newsboys. She really ramped up the paper to help ramp up Warren's political career. From when he ran for several different offices, including being senator United States Senator from Ohio. And she just loved the fact that he would be president of the United States. She wanted it very much. And she too, we keep mentioning health, and I find that intriguing with some of these first ladies. Florence always had a chronic kidney disease, Bright's disease. So she was not in great health when she became first lady, but nevertheless, she took on the job to her fullest. And she was into astrology very much like Nancy Reagan. We won't get a chance to talk about Nancy Reagan, but we can mention her here because I think we all remember hearing that in the news when Nancy was first lady and her interest in astrology. And Florence was also interested in astrology, and she actually consulted an astrologist when Warren was trying to get the Republican nomination for president. And the astrologer told her that he would get the nomination, he would become president, but he would die in office. And that sends chills up my spine because that's exactly what did happen, as you know. And he died in office, and that's where Calvin Coolidge became president. Florence was the first lady to invite celebrities into the White House, and she was very outspoken with the press as well. She said to Warren right after he became president, "Well, Warren, I got you the presidency. Now, what are you going to do with it?" And she made no secret out of going out to the press and letting them know that she got him into the White House. She would tell the press that I got him the presidency. She would tell the press, the president does very well when he listens to me, and he doesn't do very well when he doesn't listen to me. Okay. Can you imagine that now? That would be breaking news, wouldn't it? If the first lady said that. She would tell the press that the only real hobby I have is my husband. So she was very, very outspoken, but she did a lot of hard work as a first lady, was an excellent hostess. As I mentioned, was the first to bring celebrities into the White House. And like Eleanor Roosevelt.
You wanted me to mention the White House China?
Thank you. Yes, I'll finish that one sentence and I'll go into that story. But she was a premier White House hostess. They nicknamed her the Duchess. Yes, they served liquor in the White House, even though it was during Prohibition. They served it at Warren had famous poker games where he would play poker with his best friends in his cabinet. And Florence she wouldn't drink the liquor, but she would pour it. And so these poker games were famous, and President Harding was very much into them. And one time during a poker game, he gambled away a complete set of Harrison's china, the china we were talking about from Caroline Harrison. So I find that pretty fascinating, but sad at the same time that he would gamble away a set of china. I know we're running. How are we okay on time, Sally? Or
Few more minutes. We'll go a little over.
Okay.
It's okay.
cut me off when it's time, for questions, because we can stop anytime.
Probably about just a couple more minutes. Pick which one you want to say, and then if anybody has any questions, we can go to that.
Okay, I'm going to show you a couple pieces here. I'll show you some memorabilia from the next two first ladies I was going to talk about, but this is, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, and this is an original menu from a 1950 event that she attended. And even though she wasn't first lady anymore, I love when they put this on here. Grossinger's welcomes the first lady of the world, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, and I think that's pretty cool because she was known as the first lady of the world. And I also have a letter by her that's hand signed by her. I wanted to share with you just a couple other things. As we mentioned before, I've been friends with President and Mrs. Carter for several years. They've been very supportive of my history work. This picture here, I love it. This was sent to me about a month ago. That's Mrs. Carter holding a copy of my newest book, Symbols of Patriotism. She's in the book, and I dedicated the book to her. She was very, very helpful with the book, called me several times while I was writing it to tell me stories. There's a couple of stories in there that you wouldn't hear anywhere else that she told me I could put in the book. And she's so kind that when she would call me and tell me these stories, and then she would say to me, I hope you know, Larry, that I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you that you have to put these in. And I said, Mrs. Carter, I know you would never tell me what to do. And I just thank you so much for calling me and sharing that with me. And but she was so worried that I would think that she was telling me that I needed to put it in there. And she was so helpful. And I wanted to share this piece. This was one of my favorite pieces. This was it's a hardcover, leather-bound hardcover program from President Obama's 2013 inauguration. And shortly after the Carters had been at the inauguration, they were at my house, at Diane's, my house, for lunch. And Mrs. Carter brought this in a very official looking bag with a presidential seal on it. And she said, this was our program from the Obama inauguration, and we thought you would like it for your collection. And so they gave that to us with some other things that were in their gift bag. And as fate would have it, as I mentioned, I have this Forrest Gump type of life, but as fate would have it, shortly after they gave this to me, our congressman invited me to see President Obama and then Vice President Biden speak. They were coming near where I live here. And so he gave me VIP tickets to there, thinking that I might meet President Obama. I took this with me in case I met him. I did meet him, and I told him I was friends with President Carter and asked him if he would sign it for me. So he signed it. And you can see President Carter's signature above that. President Carter didn't sign this when he gave it to me. The next time he was at my house, I told him that I had met President Obama and that President Obama had signed it. And so President Carter said, well, would you like me to sign it as well? And so he did. And I found it interesting.
I just got to say, wow, for everybody here. That was pretty cool.
That's one of the pieces of my collection that I really cherish. And was given by a great friend, and I really cherish it, and it's got a great story with it. So with that, sorry I went over a little bit here, but I would be glad to open it up to questions and answer them if I can answer them for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us, and we really appreciate it. And the reason it went over a little bit is because of my little thing at the beginning. So I appreciate it. And if anybody has a question, either make it known or raise your little hand on your thing. I wanted to just throw out real quick, since I feel like I rushed you through this. Did you have anything else to say about Eleanor Roosevelt? I just, as the years go by, I get more and more interested in her.
Well, yeah, the one thing that I can mention with her is that that I really find intriguing with her is Eleanor had a very difficult childhood. She was her father was Teddy Roosevelt's brother, and he was an alcoholic. And bottom line is, her mother and her father both died by the time she was, I think, 11 years old, something like that. And you know, she was not. Every time I say this, I never know quite how to put it, but Eleanor was not a pretty child, nor a pretty lady, and you know that's well written about and everything. But as a child, and seeing pictures of her, I really don't think she was a homely child, but her family thought she was, and they would say things to her like, you know, she's an ugly duckling that will hopefully grow up to be a swan, those types of things. And she really had a self-confidence issue, rightfully so, after losing her parents and then having family members say that type of thing to her. And she went off to boarding school, and her teacher changed her life there. Her teacher took her under her wing and built up her self-confidence. And, you know, she took that self-confidence and then used it every day in her life. And even before being first lady, and what she did with that is she actually took the same thing that her teacher taught her and built her self-confidence up with. She did the same for her husband when he got polio and changed history. You know, when FDR got polio, his mother wanted him to just, you know, he was wealthy, the family was wealthy. His mother wanted him to just quit everything and just, you know, be a gentleman with an easy life. And Eleanor wouldn't have it, and she convinced him to run for governor of New York State. And I think that's wonderful that she took her own life lessons and applied them to her husband, and she really changed history. I mean, she was the longest serving first lady. Her husband was the longest serving president in World War, you know, during World War II. So that's the one thing, you know, again, we could go on and on about all these first ladies, but you asked, so I wanted to mention a couple of things there.
I appreciate that. And I see Rob Raines has his hand up. You got a question, Rob?
I do. I just want to know where the term first lady came from. How did that get started? Who was the first president's wife who was known by that title? Any idea?
Great question. It's not really known exactly who the first one was. It's mostly attributed to Lucy Hayes, after a newspaper reporter had been at an event that she was at and wrote an article about her, calling her the first lady of the land. But it took a lot of years for that to really develop into being commonplace. At first, no one knew what to call the first lady. You know, she was called Mrs. President lots of times, you know, all different types of things. She was called by her first name, Mrs., you know, whatever the last name was, President, Mrs. President. So it took a long time to evolve. I actually talk about that a little bit in the book. And but Lucy Hayes is the one that it probably started to get a little more commonplace after that article.
All right. And does anybody else have a question or anything? Or does anybody have any comments? I see Mike Kaiser there. I saw you.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand, but
All right, I hear you. Go ahead.
by any chance, have you heard of a woman who, unfortunately, she died last year, but a woman named Helen Shopmaker?
Doesn't sound familiar to me, no.
Helen Shopmaker made a donation to the Mercantile Library here in St. Louis. It's one of the largest collections of campaign memorabilia. It takes up 2 huge rooms in the library here. So if you ever get to St. Louis, you have to go see that collection. And
Thank you for telling me. Yeah.
Who lives in St. Louis to go see Helen Shopmaker's collection.
Thanks for telling us, because
Yeah,
Rob
thank
Raines
you.
actually likes those buttons and collected some when he
Oh
was
my God,
young.
she has things that are so, she even has a Chad machine.
Oh, wow.
Neat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? Is that you, Jackie?
I have a
What do you
question.
got? Jackie, I'm on Jackie first, and then we'll get to
Yeah, right now on PBS is an 8-episode series about Roosevelt and Eleanor and his relationship with the Crown Princess of Norway. Have you watched that, or do you know anything about that time in history? It was during World War II.
No, I have not watched that particular. I'm familiar with that documentary, but I have not
Mhm.
watched it. No.
Yeah, it's very interesting about the supportive relationship between Eleanor and her husband, but also these other women who were also sometimes living at the White House that he used to have relationships with. It's really, really an interesting program.
That's one thing. Had we had a little more time, I would have talked a little bit about was FDR's affair with Lucy Mercer,
Mhm.
who you may have heard from watching that documentary there. And again, I felt bad for Eleanor. I'll just elaborate just a little bit, but she really had a years and years and years of a relationship with FDR, and Eleanor knew about the relationship. She had found letters and that type of thing. But as the relationship went on, Eleanor was just kind of, she was kind of, I don't want to say cast aside, but for lack of better terms, even by her own daughter, Anna, who would know about FDR's meetings with Lucy, and even would help to arrange them without Eleanor's knowledge. And Lucy was even there at the little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia, when FDR died from a stroke, and she left there before the press could get there. She left the little White House. So, yeah, that's that's an unfortunate happenings in history, but it's history.
Mhm.
And again, that goes with what I say about how I felt bad about Eleanor her entire life.
Yeah.
That's
And
one more reason.
it also shows that she was very, very involved in the day-to-day of government affairs. She was right there in the middle of things.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Now we have a question from Kathleen.
Yeah, hi, Larry. I'm up in
Oh.
Detroit, and Canton, Ohio is 3 hours away from me. And I know that down there they've got the National Historic First Ladies site.
Yes.
And is it worth a trip there? And are there any other like First Lady museums or other sites around the country that are not specific to a president?
More specific to First Ladies, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, that would be the premier place, the Canton, Ohio one. That would be, the place. Of course, the Smithsonian has a lot.
First Ladies collection.
Of course, the White House, to see the China display. And actually, when you go into the White House, I mean, you're seeing the work of all these First Ladies that over the years have contributed to making the White House a better place. And that's one of the things I like so much about it's getting away from your question a little bit, but that I also like about not only these First Ladies that are in my book, but a lot of the First Ladies in general, Jackie Kennedy, several others that really are dedicated to history, and it went out and found some of these artifacts that were lost and brought them back to the White House. But getting back to your question, I think that the Canton, Ohio one's probably the best for First Ladies in general. But if you go to any of the presidential libraries or presidential home sites or any of that, you're going to get a fair amount of First Lady knowledge and viewing of artifacts there as well at almost any of the sites.
Yeah, one of my favorite presidential sites to visit is the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Center in Fremont, Ohio, with the big house. And then you've got the grounds and you've got the library there. You've got the grave site. And it's just a wonderful place to spend a day. Taking many friends down there.
Yes, it's wonderful. I was there I was there 2 years ago, and it's a wonderful place, and they knew who I was, that I was a historian. They gave us, my wife and I, a private tour. They took us up into their archive area and showed us some things that they didn't have out on display, and it's a wonderful place. And you can attribute that to their son, to the Hayes' son, Webb Hayes, for putting that all together.
Right. And I know the family's still very, very much involved today still with it. So it'll
Yes,
be there as a great attraction for a while.
yes.
I wanted to make sure, Lois, you had asked how to raise your hand, and I didn't know if you had anything else to say. You're good? Oh, let's get you, you're muted. Ask to unmute. You gotta unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay,
No, I
There you
have another question.
you're good, you're good. Okay. All
Thank you.
right. Well, we're doing this, and it's a different time zone where Larry is from some of us, and I know some of the other people
Me
here are
too.
up a lot later than maybe you normally do, but this is so interesting, and I just can't thank you enough for joining us, Larry. So everybody, thanks for coming tonight, and thanks, Larry.
Thank
Larry?
you.